My Lords, I find myself somewhat out of temper with many of the noble lords who have spoken. It would give me great pleasure to be able to say that I heartily swung behind them, and I do, but not very heartily, and with some difficulties and problems, some of which have been extremely well set out by my noble friend Lord Moynihan. I have two amendments in this group, in fact 3, 57A, 57B and 71B, but I don't intend to speak to them in detail, but rather to draw to some extent on my own experience. My noble friend Lord Lucas said that it wasn't simple, but nor was it difficult. But then he went on to explain that in practice it really is very, very difficult. I was at one stage in charge of the roads in Kensington and Chelsea, one of the places in London with the greatest demand for on-street parking, because nobody or very few people have an off-street place to park their car. But it's not actually terribly different in many other parts of London, especially inner London. And I was approached by someone, in fact a member of your Lordship's House, who said, would it be possible for the council to install an electric vehicle charging point outside his house? And as it happens, we had a program of installing such points at the council's expense, and I said there was no difficulty at all, and we would certainly, if he wanted that, I'm sure I could put that forward, and it could easily happen. Not everybody welcomed them, so it was nice to have a resident who did. But of course it wouldn't be for his exclusive use. And that wasn't any good at all. That wasn't at all what was wanted. And in fact, his enthusiasm for the idea waned immediately. And the discussion we've had today more or less envisages that people are going to have spaces, or groups of families, groups of houses will have clusters of spaces, more or less outside their front door, which they may have paid for, which will be for their exclusive use. And that, I'm afraid, if you put that to any local authority in London, and I suspect in many other cities, which has been elected, you would find that they would be, if they did that on a sufficient scale, they would be lynched from the nearest lamppost eventually, and they know that perfectly well. This is a politically very difficult thing. It also raises an issue of principle, which is to what extent should we be encouraging what is in fact the privatization of a public asset? It is, after all, the public that pays for the highway. It is the public that maintains the highway. And yet what is envisaged is that people are going to have exclusive use of it for themselves. And that, I'm afraid, is something which creates very, very severe difficulties that have been raised, but I don't think have been fully addressed by noble lords in the course of this debate. There is another and related point. If one puts an electric, it isn't entirely true, if one puts an electric vehicle charging point next to the carriageway, the tendency is, of course, to mark off the bay and say electric vehicles only. Now, I see that my successors in Kensington and Chelsea are not quite doing this. They're putting up signs, and this might be more effective, actually, signs politely saying, if your car is not electric, would you mind awfully not parking next to this lamppost? And that might achieve as much as an outright ban, because sometimes being polite to people gets their compliance more than anything else. But while we still have a large number of people, and mostly people on lower incomes, who still need access to an internal combustion engine car, the threat arises that they will be increasingly squeezed out of access to the public highway that they are paying for in favour of middle-class people in their Teslas. And really, it's not simply the optics of this, it's the morality of this that is highly questionable. Now, of course, some of the points raised, some of the things that can be, that have been suggested, should be done. Nothing seems more obvious to me than the suggestion from the noble Baroness Lady Pigeon that it should be mandatory for freight depots to have electric charging points in them that can be used by electric HGVs. Of course, that sort of thing should be happening. And she gave other examples of a similar character. So it's not everything is difficulty, but when you come to that interaction, particularly of cars with the pavement edge and where people park them, there are serious difficulties not only of practical local politics, but also of equity, social equity. It's very easy to think that because something is a good idea, we should all push for it and make it happen and just shove the obstacles to one side. I take, and I don't mean this to be excessively critical of the noble Baroness Lady Pigeon, but I'm very struck by her amendment that says that we must prioritise electric charging, electricity supply, grid electricity supply, to electric charging infrastructure. Prioritise means to choose. It means to say that one thing is more important than another. So my question would be, prioritise over what? Prioritise over electricity supply to a new housing estate. Prioritise over electricity supply to a new hospital or a care home. Those questions don't just vanish because one has enthusiasm for a subject. They're real choices. So I think the Minister already in the bill is going a little bit too far for what I think the public will bear. And that is the thrust and gravamen of the amendments that I have tabled. But certain noble lords, including, I regret to say, certain noble friends, have gone perhaps even further than the noble Lord the Minister. I am not following them in that direction, and I shall do my best between now and report to reason with them, as we normally do in the Conservative Party, so that we may present a united front of common sense and reason to this House when we return to this debate.